Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Riddles. I'm the producer of Franchise Hockey Manager 2, and we're here to stream a little FHM2 for you today. I'm with Adam Burnett. You won't actually hear Adam for the first couple of minutes of this because we had some audio problems with the original broadcast, and I'm going back and re-recording that now, so you will hear Adam pipe up 3 or 4 minutes into this. What we'll be doing today, a slightly different format than before. We're going to be playing a historical game, starting with the 1979 Winnipeg Jets. That'll let you, it's a little easier to get into the game starting in historical mode because it's a little bit simpler. There aren't quite as many leagues. The game tends to move along a little faster, and there's a few options that are a little more complicated in the modern game that are simplified a bit in historical. So that aside, what we'll do here is start out with a new historical game. That will kick us into the startup screen. We want 1979 as the start year. Now, 1979 was the year that Jets moved into the NHL from the WHA. They had been a legendary WHA team, setting records, winning championships, and so on. But when they came into the NHL in 1979, they were stripped bare of almost all their talent and pretty much started out as a from the bottom up expansion team. It was one of the arguably least generous expansion drafts in NHL history. The Jets were pretty terrible for the first few years. In fact, the season after this, which was the year I saw my first NHL game at the old Winnipeg Arena, they set a record for most consecutive games without a win. So that gives you an idea of just how bad this team is. Adam and I are going to take them right back to the beginning and see if we can do a little bit better with them. So I've selected 1979 as the start year. The next option here you can see is a whole expansion draft. That only applies to actual expansion years. So if when we get to, there won't be another NHL expansion for a few years, but if I was starting this game in 1978 and then we progressed to 79 when the expansion draft happened, and had the old expansion draft button unchecked, I wouldn't be able to draft any players at all off the existing teams. I would just have to sign everyone as free agents or via the draft. So it's a much bigger challenge that way. This is a little more historical. So when you get around to the expansion years, you've at least you're starting on roughly the same footing as the actual teams were, since the expansion drafts in the game tend to follow pretty much the same rules as the historical expansion drafts. The next option I'm going to select here is draft rookies / generate them at 17. That means the players new players will be joining the game at age 17, assuming the NHL draft is set at 18, which it isn't in some historical seasons. It's 20. But if it's set at 18, they'll come into the draft they'll come into the game at the beginning of the year as 17-year-olds, sit in the free agent pool up until the next draft, at which point they'll be draftable. If the draft age is longer than that, they'll be sitting around for 2 or 3 years. If we've got that option turned off, the players won't actually show up in the game until their first professional season, or at least the first season in which they were owned by a professional team. So that may be the year that they were drafted in as 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, whatever the draft age was for that year. Or if they came in as a free agent, say post-college, they might not show up till they're 23, 24. But with this, we're bringing in everybody at 17. Player development, we've got 2 options here. One is to recalculate player ratings at the beginning of each season. What that does is give you a little more of an accurate year-to-year sort of a stat replay type of game, although it's not aiming to be precisely accurate in terms of stats, but it'll give you an accurate development curve for most players. And they'll come into they'll peak at the right time, they'll start to decline at the right time, they'll retire at the right time, as they did historically. However, what I'm going to do for the purposes of this game is to switch it over to the FHM development and retirement engine. That way the guys will come in at roughly the level they were as a 17-year-old, and they will still tend to have the same approximate potential as they did in real life. But beyond that, everything is pretty much freeform. It's a lot less likely that they'll hit that potential. They may even exceed the potential. The development engine does allow for that, and their retirement isn't a set date. They will retire at whatever time is appropriate in their career. It might be, their late 20s if they're If they're not signed, if they're a fringe player, not signed by a team, and basically out of hockey at that point, if they have a great career, they might go 10 years longer than they actually did, barring injury or any other unforeseen events. The last option I'm going to leave unchecked here is set initial rosters by draft. What that does is, in the case of an NHL game, as opposed to starting with a WHA game, which there's a little problem with that. I'll get to that in a second. But when you start with initial rosters by draft, all the NHL rosters are cleared. Everybody starts on the same footing, and you do a fantasy draft to begin with. So in this case, it's 1979, and if I was a Jets, and if I happen to turn that option on and get the first pick, obviously I'd be taking Wayne Gretzky first of all, and somebody behind me takes Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, Guy Lafleur, whoever, the other top guys of that era. And you would set your rosters that way. So it's, if you want parity to begin with, if you want complete control over what your beginning roster is, select that option. But we're not going to. We want the challenge of playing with the god awful 1979 Jets. So we're going to start with that option off. Back into the manager setup now. So I've got the name in, nationality, and birth date, and I'm going to turn commissioner mode on for this in case we need to go in and make any little changes, or if we happen to want to switch teams or something. We'll leave cannot be fired off because in commissioner mode I get fired. I can always just put myself back on the team. Fog of War, I am going to leave that off for now. Normally that would obscure some of the ratings that we can't see, but I think we'll just leave it off for the purposes of this broadcast. I'm going to take general manager and head coach mode since we don't have. If we had historical coaches, I might think about leaving that in, but right now I'll just take both jobs. And we are taking over the Winnipeg Jets. God help us. And okay, and you can see at the bottom, if I had wanted to make this a multiplayer league, I could have added additional managers. Okay, so here we are into the Jets circa 1979. And if you have a look up here, you'll see I've got the mailbox flagged. And I get a little news article talking about how I've joined the Jets. The welcome to the Jets from the ownership. And there's also at the beginning, this is something that only happens in historical mode. At the beginning of each season, there'll be an announcement of all the various changes that have happened in hockey, specifically team changes, teams changing names, relocating. In this case, the WHA has gone out of business, so if we'd been started playing in '78, we would have gotten this message. And we would have the message, and the WHA, which would have been operating as a separate league in the game, would have stopped functioning at that point.
Okay. If we had started earlier, is there a big fight between the WHA and NHL for free agents?
They will go back and forth. Yeah, WHA teams don't. Neither one of them respects the league rights of the other. That was, it was originally the whole point of the WHA, that ignoring the NHL's reserve clause, which basically bound guys to teams for life, and so. When they first started up, all the NHL guys who had no option for free agency prior to that suddenly started jumping, and we got Bobby Hull moving to the Jets, Jerry Cheevers going to Cleveland, Derek Sanderson to Miami/Philadelphia, and that was the first real wave of free agency in pro hockey history. But here we are now in '79, where they've merged. They're all part of the same league now, and basically what happened to all these guys when they did merge back, the WHA teams were allowed to protect a very small number of players, but most of them, if they had existing NHL rights, those reverted to the NHL team that they belonged to, if the team was willing to take them. So we had. Basically, a guy that comes to mind is Terry Muskowski, who had been with the Jets and wound up going to Chicago and being a pretty good player for them for a few years. And if you played, sorry, go ahead.
as you say, if memory serves, there was two players were left on the Jets roster from their WHA team.
Yeah, I think they were allowed. I think it was one goalie and two skaters. And
Yeah.
there are a few other special arrangements made, like the Whalers getting to hang on to Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky staying in Edmonton. Uh, but for the most part, any of the half-decent players who were NHL caliber got repossessed by their NHL teams. I mean, there are a few guys that snuck through. The Whalers hung on to Mike Rogers, who actually turned out to be an excellent player for them, 100-point guy, because my Canucks brilliantly didn't think he was going to do anything in the as an NHLer, so said, nah, we don't want him. You take this guy who's going to put up 100 points. We don't really need to be in the playoffs or anything like that. So what you've got left of the Jets is basically the players they did protect. Morris Lukowich, the big star, I guess, in the first few years. One interesting player you do see on the roster is Dave Christian, who was actually this is a 79-80 season, so this is the year of the Miracle on Ice, the U.S. Olympic team winning the gold medal in the '80 Olympics. Since any player that played his first games in the season is on the roster from right at the start of the season, instead of having to wait until February to get Christian, the Jets start with him right at the start of the year. So it's a little bit stronger.
Well, that's nice.
That's a bit of help there. And they do have
Yeah.
some, credible players. Jimmy Mann was a first-round pick. He's actually got rated 3 stars here. He's a 3-star goon. I wouldn't try putting him on your first or
Yep.
second line. And
He wasn't a bad pick. He just wasn't a first round pick.
fair enough. And the goaltending situation is, I can't spin that. That's just abysmal. Gary Smith,
Yeah.
who had been pretty solid in the WHA, was probably pretty much at the end of his career at this point. Lindsay Middlebrook, career minor leaguer. Pierre Amel, also a career minor leaguer, one of the guys they had got in the expansion draft. And Marcus Mattsson, Finnish goalie with a Swedish name. Had been with them, I think, for part. I think he was a backup in their last WHA season. It just sticks in my mind. The first NHL game I ever saw was the Jets North Stars game, I think in '81, and the guy behind the first game I saw live, and the guy behind me screamed the entire game to get Matson the hell out of goal. I'm not sure why he thought there
Well,
was any
that
much improvement, because they were going to put Hamel in as a backup, but it wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference. So we are now, September. We're in September of 1979. It puts us right at the beginning of the preseason. We've got 7 games to start with to maybe play with the roster a little bit and see what fits there. But first things, we've got to trim this down a little bit. And in the historical game, one of the differences between that and the modern game is, in the modern game, you'll have an actual farm team. So the Jets, if you're playing the Jets in 2016, you've got the Manitoba Moose to send people to. In this case, it's the reserve list, since we're simulating. That simulates a couple of different things, like different levels of the minor leagues. Guys who would go back to junior, and where you, if you're in years where you're able to loan players to teams outside of your system, that sort of thing. It's sort of a catch-all for all of that. When you've got players on the reserve list, they're not. They're still going to develop as if they were on a minor league team. So don't worry that by sending players to that, you're going to screw up their development or anything. They won't be thrilled that they're down there, but they're going to still develop as if they were in, say, the AHL or whatever the appropriate league is.
Okay.
I think it was the Jets' farm team this year was Tulsa in Central League. So
Okay.
I'm going to trim the roster down a bit. Middlebrook is definitely going down.
This is where B. Daly was still playing for the Jets to help them out in goaltending.
Where, who?
Joe Daly. He was one of their goalies. Joe Daly. He was
Yeah, I
one
remember
of their goalies
Daly.
in the WHA most of the time.
I think didn't he retire right at the start of first NHL year? I'd have to check on that. I may have that a little bit wrong in the database.
I think he.
Yeah, I think he was probably smart and knew what was coming and got out of that before he.
Actually, I think the big thing was he didn't want to leave Winnipeg, and he was going to be forced to go somewhere else.
Oh, okay, yeah, that would have made sense, because he would have been one of the guys. I think it was L.A. or Buffalo that held his rights, because coming out of the draft because he had to jump over there in the mid 70s. And okay, let's see
Yeah.
the other guy I'm going to send down as we're talking
Well,
about this.
Joe Daly still lives in Winnipeg. Sporting, not sports, doing trading cards and autograph stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's
Actually, so yeah.
okay. And just looking
Joe
through
Daly
the
Sports, I think.
yeah, I think I've seen ads for that on TV. Just skipping through the roster, and for guys I'm going to send down, Gord Smith had been the captain of the Capitals for 1 year when they were not so great, but they picked him up in the. He wasn't protected in the WHA expansion draft. Jets picked him up, but he's so bad by this point, he's going down.
Is that
Um,
B. Melrose? Is that Barry
that is Barry
Melrose?
Melrose, believe it or not. Yep, he was. The Jets picked him up. They grabbed a fair number of players off of the WHA teams that weren't part of the merger, Cincinnati and Birmingham. So Melrose had been in Cincinnati for a couple of years. I don't think he even had the mullet at that point. And
Oh, that's
so he is on the
occasionally
roster, and
happens.
he was actually pretty decent at that point. I believe wasn't that long in Winnipeg. I think he went to the Leafs, if I remember correctly, after a season or two, and uh, didn't hang around there long either. That was his career was pretty much done at that point, and into coaching, which has gone somewhat better for him. And I'm just going to keep paring this down. They've got a lot of defensemen. Most of these guys are left defensemen, but it's not going to be much of a drop off for them to be switching over to the right side. And as soon as I start playing them as right defensemen for a few weeks or a month or so, it will eventually they will flip over, and you'll start seeing them listed as RDs, and there won't be much of a performance decrease in the meantime.
That's good to know. Wait, how's Brett? Oh, never mind. That's Bobby Hall. I
That's
don't
right. That's
understand
Bobby
things.
Hall.
I was thinking, wait,
Yeah, you
like
wish
how's
that was
Brett
Brett
Hall?
Hall. Okay, so what am I? I'm down to 8 defensemen here, and start trimming out the forwards. Some of these guys really obscure. In a lot of these cases, they may be guys that only played 1 or 2 NHL games, or even never played in the NHL, and are just in the database because they happen to play in the WHA, or happen to slip in for some other reason. Bud Stefanski, Ranger Farmand. I think he was picked one of the guys that was picked near the end of the expansion draft.
Well, you have to be able to fill a couple rosters, so it's not a bad thing to have some variety.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something when I was working on the building up the historical database. Tried to make sure there's plenty of lower level guys and they're rated properly, so you can have some flexibility in as to who you're filling out your roster with. And something I'm doing right now is filling out even more. I've begun to go back through the older drafts and the draft bust guys who never the first rounders who never saw a game in the NHL, getting them into the database. Any other historically interesting players that didn't make it in, particularly as I'm going to be doing this as we when we do FHM3 next year. It's going to be going back to 1917. And there were other non-NHL leagues at that point. So there are some great players who never actually played in the NHL, so I'm getting them into the database as well, and I'm just trying to do the same thing to a lesser extent in the later years with the prominent draft busts, the career minor leaguers who were always the top 10 in the AHL in scoring, but never quite got there. But I'm continuing to cut this down. Wayne Dillon, who actually had a couple of
From the chat, Golfer NYM24 asks, is this game touchscreen playable? I have a Surface Pro 3. Or is it better with a mouse and keyboard?
Definitely better with a mouse and keyboard. We've got a few guys. One of the testers has been playing it with his Surface Pro. He mentioned there are a couple of issues with the way, I think it was drop-down lists. He struggles with a bit. It's definitely better.
Now,
It's designed for mouse and keyboard, but it is, I think, from what I've heard, playable with the touchscreen.
Golfer, please note that in the stream you can't see the drop-down boxes because for some reason it just doesn't get detected.
Yeah, it's just some oddity
What,
with the software that I think Adam and I are both using, and
but
we'll
they
try
are
to figure
there.
that out. But trust me, they are there. I'm not every time you see the player pop up, so that's obviously working correctly. But I just right click there, and I've got a whole context sensitive list of
Yeah.
things to do with the player. That's why you see the players disappearing as I click on them. I'm right clicking and
Yeah.
scrolling down and setting them down to the reserve list. And let's see what do we got. Four to go here. So
If you're
Hilliard
wondering what
Graves,
it looks
legendary
like,
Canuck. He's gonna have to go.
if you're wondering what it does look like in terms of the drop down boxes, there are some images on the blog, and I will in the comments.
Okay, almost there. I've gone down to three centers, but one of those guys will move one of the wings to the center. Probably Lyle Moffat. He played a little bit of center. Dave Christian can play center as well. So okay, I've got the roster cut down
Well, cut
to
Thomas Steen. Oh,
got Thomas. Well, he was still. Remember, this is he didn't actually join the Jets until '81. I think it was a couple of years later. So they've drafted him. They've got the rights to him at this point. That's why he's in the game. But I think he was only what was it here?
I know,
Let me pop him
but
up.
he was a fan favorite
Yeah,
in
he just
Winnipeg for a lot of
two
years.
stars at this point, but he is going to eventually get up to 3.5 stars. He'll probably actually do a little bit better than that. But for now, we'll leave him down, let him develop a little bit before we start this season. We don't want to destroy his morale by putting him on what's going to be a terrible team. Let's face it.
Yeah. So can you, when you're talking about moving a left wing to a center, does that naturally change, or do you have to flip it in settings?
What I'll do is I'll be showing that to you. I'll show it to you in a second when we get into the lines. But I will put him on those lines, and as you're playing him on those
Okay.
lines, if you play somebody at a position enough, that's really the only way to do it. Get him experience on the job, and he will eventually pick up that position. And the first on here, you'll notice. Let me see. Who's a good example? Christian might be a good one. You can see when I open up Dave Christian's player page, he's listed as right wing / center.
Okay.
So that tells you he can play a little center too.
Okay.
But when you're on the main
Now,
roster scene, it'll only list a primary position. If I play him at center a lot, eventually it'll push center to the primary position, and you'll see
okay.
C under here. You'll see C Dave Christian instead of RW Dave Christian.
Okay. So just taking a really absurd thing, what happens if we put Bobby Hull as the goalie? Would he
Won't work.
eventually
He can't.
develop into something of a goalie?
No, that's the one thing that doesn't happen. Goalies will not develop into skaters and vice versa. That would be
Okay.
carrying a little bit too far.
Well, that's what I would figure, but at the same time, somebody out there will try
Oh
that.
yeah, absolutely.
And so that's why I was wondering.
And be sadly disappointed it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
and I'm just
in that token, could I put Bobby Hull back on defense then? And he could learn
absolutely. Yep.
that position?
Yep, you could.
Okay.
And if you left him, I mean, he's going to have ratings problems because he's not going to be much of a shot blocker. He's not going to be very good at clearing the front of the net. His screening abilities are going to be completely wasted, but he does have the big shot. So if there's really, I mean, any forward
It
in the
is
game who you want
possible.
to move back, it would make sense because it's Bobby Hall. He's getting, since he's going to be able to shoot from range a lot better than the typical forward is.
Okay.
Now, what I'm doing now is going through and dressing players. You can see the lineup at the bottom keeps increasing. Remember, this is 79, where they only dressed 19 players instead of the current 20. So there was typically they would run three lines. There'd be two guys sitting on the bench, and you'd occasionally see guys double shifted into the fourth line,
Okay.
or the two. Yeah, depending on how the coach handled, you do it a few different ways. Or the two fourth liners would only get spot duty covering for penalties and that sort of thing. I think that is just about Okay, I've got 19 players dressed now. Oh wait, I dressed 7 defensemen. I only want 6. So we will sit down Tim Waters, who is a little young at this point, but eventually turned into a pretty good veteran for him. Mike Amadeo is the other one who's sitting out. And we got sort of odds and ends. Scott Campbell, decent defenseman. Craig Norwich, good offensive guy who had half a decent had won like half a good season with St. Louis in 81-82 and was pretty much never heard from again. I think the Jets actually traded him. He started this year in Winnipeg, but was traded to Colorado. So that's not much of an improvement at this point. And let's see, Lawrence Stamler can sit. Joudouin, we'll put him in. He's a veteran. So the guys, you can see now that I've benched are Stamler, Heaslip, Tim Waters, Mike Amadeo. I have 4, 7, 11 forwards dressed, 6 defensemen, so I can do three full defensive pairs. Before I skip over to the lines, I am just going to adjust my captains. Lukowicz wasn't the captain at this point. It was Lars-Erik Schuberg, so we'll just do that for the sake of being historical. Make Lukowicz assistant captain. And leave Peter Sullivan as the captain. He was a pretty solid Jet for that first year. Went downhill in a hurry after that. If I was really going to be careful about it, I would flip into the mental ratings and sort them by leadership. And you'd see Lukowicz, Ron Wilson, Scott Campbell, and the guys who are typically stronger leaders have the best ratings. You can't go entirely by the leadership rating for deciding captaincy. There are a few other factors, some of them hidden, some not, but that's a bit of a trial and error thing. So we are going to leave Schuberg in as captain, and now I will switch over to the line screen. And here you can see we'll start out with the goalies. Gary Smith is going to back him up. We'll put Pierre Hamel in, which was a Leaf cast-off when the Leaf goalies weren't even that good to begin with, so you got an idea of what we're dealing with there. We're going to get killed with him in goal. The only defenseman we have, the only priority whose priority is playing right defense is Melrose, but Melrose is not really a guy you want on your top pair. Most teams, he's probably a number 5, 6 guy at best. It's Jets, so he'll be on our second pair. Okay. Scott Campbell was a guy. I can't remember exactly how this worked, but St. Louis really wanted Campbell. He was pretty well regarded coming out of the WHA. He had a ton of injury problems, but they couldn't. I think he was actually one of the ones we mentioned earlier where the Jets protected coming out of the expansion draft. And St. Louis wanted him, couldn't get him, eventually traded him for a year or two later, but by that point he had huge injury problems and didn't last very long with the Blues. But he's not too bad right now, so we'll leave him on the first pair with Schuberg, who was a great WHA defenseman, had kind of a terrible first season in the NHL, and that was pretty much it for him. And let's see, Al Cameron, who is... actually I'm going to put Norwich in there and have a little more offense on the second pair, and I'm going to put Cameron in the left defense spot. Cameron was a Red Wing for a few years. They had been using him less and less as time went by. You can see if I'm covering over his history right now. He was down to 9 games in the last season, but he may have a little bit left in him. Mark Plantery was a rookie. I don't think he really played too much in real life going until the 81-82 season, but he's not going to improve a whole lot, so I'm not too worried about ruining his morale by playing him here. So he's kind of a sacrificial lamb on the last pair right now. Forward lines. Now, I've actually got Bobby Hull in the second line here. The problem is we've got 2 of our best offensive players, Hull and Lukowicz, are both left wings. Neither one of them has a alternate position. I could try switching them over, but let's try for a little balance here. Ron Wilson, who is on the first line right now. He actually, I think if I remember right, put up about 60 points that year in 79-80, the season we're in. But he was really better known as a defensive forward for most of his career. I think that was just a temporary thing. So I'm actually going to swap him with Peter Sullivan, who was more of an offensive guy. I'm going to pull Dave Christian off the right wing on the first line and let him be the third line center. Let him develop there. Now the right wing spot. This is where it gets iffy. Okay, we got Peter Marsh, who was a pretty big scorer in the WHA. He actually wound up traded to Chicago in the NHL, where he was mostly a third liner, not incredibly successful, but he's as good as we got for right now. Willie Lindstrom, who was with the Jets for what was it, well into the late '80s, I think. Was around different, and eventually wound up on Pittsburgh. Great veteran, one of the guys who made the transition to the NHL really well. Left wings, Lyle Moffat was another WHA Jet. Will not the most talented guy in the world by this point. He's kind of on the downside of his career, actually. But we'll put him with Christian. We're going to leave Jimmy Mann in. Mann was the first-round pick of the Jets last year. Basically, straight-up goon. Can't really call him anything other than that. But you can put him on the line. He's on there so nobody's going to mess with Christian.
Well, that's how it should be. You need to have those guys protecting them.
Exactly, yeah. And Jules Drouin, who had been a pretty good Islander for many years, but was way past his prime at this point. We'll stick him on the fourth line, and Dave Hoyda, who was sort of the tier 2 goon. He played with the Flyers. Hoyda, I had him on left wing already. I didn't see that. He'd come over from the Flyers in the expansion draft. Another just basically he's there to fight. Oh, right, that's dumb. That's why I was doing this because I've only got 11 forwards. So the question here is what to do with that last right wing spot. What I'm going to do is, since Christian is a fairly good player and can play right wing as well, I'm going to stick him on that line. Oops.
Well, it's not like the fourth line is going to be playing tons of minutes either. So
actually, no. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that line with very low minutes and plug Hoyda and Drouin. Actually, no. We'll put Christian between Hoyda and Mann. So he's got two goons with him, so nobody's going to hurt him at all. And Drouin and Moffat are both going to be credible penalty kill guys. So I'm going to make them my second penalty killing unit. We really don't want Jimmy Mann killing penalties. Ron Wilson, that's a good first choice. Actually, I'm going to let Bobby Hull play in the first penalty killing unit to give him a little more time. Willie Lindstrom, and we got there's not a lot to choose from here. Let's go with Sullivan on the third penalty killing unit. And when I'm setting up the defensive pairs, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to try to keep my regular pairs together on the penalty killing unit, because what happens if you're trying to force if I made this Melrose and Cameron instead of Melrose and Plantery, you're going to create a line changing problem with yourself when you're pulling one guy who may or may not be tired and mismatching him with somebody who he hasn't been playing with, and then it's going to take a little while for the AI to sort it out and get them coordinated again. So you've got your Cameron Plantery pair and your Norwich Melrose pair. So what I'm going to do is we'll make Cameron and Plantery the second pair, Campbell and Schoberg on the first pair of the veterans, and Norwich, who has no defensive skills to speak of at all, and poor old Barry Melrose on the third pair.
Well, someone's got to be there.
Yep, and we will do, I think, pretty much the same thing with the defensive pairs in the last group. We are, by the way, working on expanding these to cover more of the possible situations. Like you'll see, you don't have a 3-on-3, for example, here, which is something that's gotten a lot more critical to the NHL with the introduction of the 3-on-3 overtime. We're going to be adding that and have been working on. I'm not sure how far along Sebastian is with that. So it may come as in an update for version 2. It may have to wait until version 3. But we definitely want to allow a little more detail in that. Shootout spots here are totally irrelevant since we don't have shootouts at this point in the NHL. 4-on-4 pairs, we'll leave the top guys as they were, but put Norwich and Melrose in on the second pair. Four and four forwards, you want guys who are a little better at skating. Going to put Lindstrom and Lukowicz in there, even though we don't have a center to take the face off. And we'll swap Bobby Hull and Peter Sullivan onto the second 4 and 4 units. Now, power plays. This is where it gets. You can do different things with the forwards You'll see one position here in the power play is listed as P. That's the point spot. It doesn't necessarily designate a side. It's just for if you want to put a forward back on the power play, he won't be penalized as much for playing in that position as he normally would be on a 5-on-5 unit. So, in
which
this
is
case,
a good thing.
Yeah. So we've got.
Especially.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's a good thing, especially since that's how so many teams are playing. With 4 forwards and 1 defenseman.
Yeah, and in this case, we've got Bobby Hull, who's got the great slap shot, so we can throw him back there, and we just put the regular first line as a power play unit. And you'll see that Schuberg is taking the defensive spot there, and Hull is on the point. I think I will put another defensive. Norwich is definitely somebody who's worth using on the power play. I could put, say, Scott Campbell into the second defensive pair in the power play, but I think we're still better off. We can find somebody that is a little more useful there. I think I will throw Peter Marsh back there just for the heck of it. If I had a decent defenseman, I would probably put him on the second unit. And for the 5-on-3, I'm just going to use the identical units. You might. Sorry, just having to do this in my head here.
Yeah, no, it's not
okay.
A big
And
deal.
it's in that case, yeah. I mean, you might want to vary it a little bit depending on the makeup of your team. If you got somebody who's such a huge defensive liability, you don't want to put him on the 5-on-4 unit, or if you if you want to use forwards on the point, but you only want to do it 5-on-3 because even though they're not penalized as much for playing out of position, it's still, if the play goes back down the ice, you're still going to have a forward in a defensive spot, and he's not going to be as good as doing certain things as if I'd had, say, in this case, Scott Campbell.
Yeah.
But in this case, we'll just go with that setup. If I had wanted to skip all of this, I've got, and you can't see the drop downs, of course, but when I click on the action button, I get options to clear all the lines completely, ask the assistant how to set up my lines, and actually now that I walk you through this, I'll just show you how the assistant would optimize this. I'm going to get it to set the lines. There's also a third option, AI setup organization, which will call players up and down. We don't want to go that far, but let's see what the AI does if it's close to the way I had it set. And made a few changes. Double shifted Drouin at the bottom. Didn't use Christian, but yeah, we're fairly close.
That's not
no
too
Hall
bad.
on the second line. I think what I will do is just swap Hull and Peter Marsh around on the power play because I really want Bobby Hull on the power play point. But yeah, it gets the general idea. It's no. We do not want Jimmy Mann on the penalty killing unit. He'll just take more penalties. Okay, and you can see now that with the right defense situation, swap Melrose and Norwich around a bit. But the guys who are listed as left defense primary, Norwich, Plantery, you'll see in fairly short order get right defense switched over to their primary positions. Okay, so we have that done. Now, tactics. This is, I think we're going to, see, we're running a little low on time here, so I don't have quite an eye. This is a whole different area to get into. It's going to take a while to go through all the depths of this. So for now, I think we'll leave this to another broadcast and just go ahead with the default ones.
Okay.
Call it balanced normal. And I promise we will get into much more detail on that later. There's a lot to dig into there. But for now, that's fine. And looking at the schedule, we've got a game against the Capitals in 3 days. So what I will do is go to the play box. Fortunately, this menu does show up properly. And autoplay until next game, and it will just run us through to the next game. And you can see it's popped up. It only took a second. we were at that Capitals game. Now, what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is Adam has been playing these out, but I think everybody's has seen those now. You can always go back and take a look at them if you want. What I will do in this case is just click on Finish Today, and you saw briefly the pop-up that it was simulating. And you can see here now that the game was simulated. We didn't go in and play it, but we still managed to lose anyhow. 4-3.
Oh, that's not a surprise.
It's a close game. Keep in mind the Capitals were terrible at that point. Big crowd of 10,409 to win the Winnipeg Arena. Approximately 5,000 of which could actually see the ice without some sort of giant pillar in front of them. Remember that very well.
Yes,
the hangover from where you couldn't see the near side of the boards if you were sitting anywhere in the upper deck.
My favorite part of the old Winnipeg Arena was the one end. There was no level seating. It was all just stairs. So you had about 120 steps to go up to the very top.
Yep, that's the first game I went to. I think we were about third from the top. Had to go all the way up there. So it was a fun trip when you're 10 years old.
Yeah.
And the other thing about the Winnipeg Arena, the giant picture of the Queen.
Oh, of course. Actually, one of the scariest things happened in the old Winnipeg Arena. I was at a concert in the old upper deck, and there was so much movement, the whole upper deck started swinging. That's a great feeling.
That is not a great feeling.
You're just going...
If you're acrophobic like me, that is not a good feeling at all.
Yeah. I'm hoping this thing's hooked well enough into the ceiling as the whole upper deck swaying. You're just going,
I'm bad enough in the upper deck of going when I go to see a game in Vancouver. That's a little steep for me, or the super upper. They can't remember what they call it in Calgary, but they've got a level that's above the upper deck, where the saddle is, and that's don't want to even try sitting up there because it's so high up. Okay, but anyhow, getting away from my phobias and back to the game. See, Washington, they put up a good fight, and looks like we lost the game. Antero Lettinen, who didn't have much of an NHL career, but we were actually leading 3-2 in the third and blew it with 7 seconds left. Way to go, Jets.
That's all right.
You can see the game here, and this lets you get a little bit more detail on how your team did. The one thing in here that most people will recognize a lot of the official stats, goals, assists, plus minus, shots, missed, blocked, etc. And we've got all these modern stats here that wouldn't have actually been tracked back in the day. But here you can see things like blocked shots and giveaways and takeaways. And total ice time, face-off results. The one stat that isn't a real, an official NHL stat, this is something that we do ourselves, is the game rating. And not to confuse people, it's not a straight-up rating as to how well he played in that particular game. It's how well he did his assigned job. So if, in the case of, you can see somebody here like Craig Norwich. Norwich, in the game, he wound up -2. But he's got an 80 game rating. Well, how does that happen? He was on the ice for 2 goals. He didn't get any points. He did have 4 shots. He and missed a couple more. He was getting a lot of shot attempts off, played a lot. It's also keeping track of things that you can't see in his stats, like passes completed and that sort of thing. And since Norwich is an offensive defenseman, he's expected to be productive offensively. More than likely, he was completing a lot of passes, things we can't see in the stats, contributing offensively. And the fact that he got burned a couple of times on goals, well, that's Craig Norwich. He's not a great defensive defenseman. Nobody's expecting him to do that. He did, and he lived up to his end of the bargain, did his job. It's the guys around him. You can see Campbell has only got a 49, and Scott Campbell is expected to be a good defensive defenseman. Here he's -1. Hasn't blocked any shots, only has 1 hits, had no takeaways. More than likely was getting a lot of shots against him while he's on the ice. And that's why he's not doing as well. And just going down the roster, and you can see that it can be a little confusing over a single game, but when you play a couple of weeks worth, you'll start to see which guys are living up to doing what they should be doing. And if say Jimmy Mann is fighting a lot and maybe getting an occasional point here or there, that's what Jimmy Mann's supposed to be doing. He'll get a decent rating in the 70s or so once it starts. But if you start seeing guys dipping down into the low 60s, 50s, then you've got a problem. Then you've got to look at maybe changing how they're what sort of role is assigned to them, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a future broadcast, the way that works, or changing how you're using them on the roster and in the lineup.
Okay.
But getting back to our schedule, only an exhibition game, fortunately. What I'm going to do is just tear through the rest of the exhibition schedule. With this lineup, we may get an injury that makes me stop, but we'll go right to the regular season start. And sure enough, Norwich is injured. What I'm going to do here is go into the manager options. And what you can do is, if you shut down all of these, this is a way to play where if you just want to watch for the sake of how the season plays out, or if you want to play hands off your team for a couple of seasons, you can click off all the exit autoplay options. Your game will never get interrupted until you hit the date, whatever you've chosen to. I'm also going to switch team control to AI. You can't see it right here now, but when I'm clicking on the option button, there's a single click instead of having to go through all of these and click assistant, etc., etc. I'm going to switch those all with one button, all to AI, like I just did there. Bear in mind that when you've got your assistant setting lineups, he will make necessary roster moves if he has to.
Okay. I got a question for you then.
Yep.
So a friend of mine who's been playing the game was trying to simulate through a season rather quickly, and the game kept stopping for him every time his scouts were sending their latest reports. Is there any way to take that off?
Yeah, they have to. Let me just
Is an option in exit autoplay?
Yeah, actually, that is the. I'm just trying to remember which one it is. It's exit autoplay. I believe it's the personal message one. That should shut out. Yeah, it's personal message. That'll stop the scout messages because they're considered a personal message direct to you and not a news item. So that will shut it off. Yeah, that's right.
So
I've got that all set to the AI control, and now you'll just see it stream through theirs, and you see it only lasted a couple of seconds, and we can go back now and look at how we did in the exhibition season. Let's see, lost to the Kings, tied the Islanders. Oh, we beat the Leafs.
Also,
That's the Leafs, though. Beat the Leafs, beat the Whalers, lost to the Kings, beat the Leafs again. Normally the ratings only go 1 to 20, so once you start getting out of getting above that, you're getting into the Gordie Howe, Chris Chelios type of range. And Howe has probably got, I think, 2 or 3 points higher than literally anybody else in the game. So he will stick around, but even tinkering with that, there are limits to how much longer, how late he'll play. He'll play before he retires, and 51 is pretty much at the end of those.
Well, if anyone can be playing into their 50s, that's impressive anyways.
Especially at a high competitive level. I haven't seen it happen with a created player yet. It's theoretically possible because the aging rating isn't static. It'll improve as the player. If the player is relatively healthy and plays full seasons frequently, and there are a few other factors as well. That's not the only way to do it.
Yeah.
But his aging rating will increase, which will mean his career curve tends to go a little bit longer, and a guy can play well into his 40s that way. But it's a very, very rare thing to happen for a guy to get up into his say mid to late 40s. It should be able to happen.
We'll have to be watching Jaeger right now.
Might not be a bad question for the Facebook page. I'd like to see what the oldest guy anybody's ever had in a long-term game was. And Jaeger is somebody I've actually come to think of. I should probably go in there and adjust his because that guy just isn't slowing down any.
No, he's playing very impressively for his age.
Okay, and there we are now. So looks like we've gotten through the season pretty much unscathed by injuries, except for Norwich, who somehow managed to cut his neck That's a little scary, but he's out for a while. The AI has called up a replacement.
Well, that's. Is there an email for that? I just kind of want to see that now.
Yeah, I think I might have turned the emails. Oh no, I hadn't turned the emails off at that point. So
Neck laceration. Oh, those neck are scary.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I said that should happen. There should be guys going around looking for those. So
Okay, and I think we're probably running a little bit low on time here. So maybe the thing to do is just since we're right at the start of the regular season, we'll leave it here. And next time out, I think we'll maybe go into the tactics, possibly scouting a little more, and just continue with this historical game and see if we can make anything out of the Jets in their first year. I'm not terribly optimistic about it, but we'll see what we can find out there and see if we can get them improved a little bit. And maybe
for
avoid that
sure.
number one overall draft pick.
All right. Well,
Uh,
thank you very much for tuning in. You can follow us on Twitter at Franchise Hockey. You can follow us on
oh,
Facebook
we should
and
probably
find us on
anybody.
there
Did we
at
have any other
Franchise.
questions people were wondering about before we signed off? I can't see the Twitch page right now. I'm paranoid about getting that echo back again, so I didn't open it up.
You know what? Mine is not working either at the moment, so there was not any questions last scene. But if you do have questions, by all means, please leave them on or send them on Twitter, post them on Facebook. The Facebook page is at Franchise Hockey Manager. Come to the forums, which is at
Yep.
otpdevelopments.com. If you want, this video will be archived up on YouTube. If you have questions or comments, please leave them on there as well. We
Yep,
read and
absolutely.
respond to everything. And I think that's about it. We will be back at approximately the same time next week.
Hopefully, with all of our technical issues ironed out, and be able to get a little bit of a smoother start. We're almost there. We were much better than last week. Put it that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning in.
Okay,
And have
thanks
a good
everybody.
night.
Have a good night.